Hello again, dear ones. Welcome. My name is Christopher Watson, and this is part 2 of a look at the hymn Lo He Comes with Clouds Descending, which these days is almost always sung to a tune called Helmsley, which is what we're looking at in this part. In part 1, we looked at the text or texts, because the text that most of us know by Charles Wesley was a reworking of an earlier original text by John Kennick. I found that story interesting when I was researching it, and it reflected a very different understanding of the propriety or properness of copying another author's text. In this part, I'd like to have a look at the music. Similarly to the text, the tune went through multiple versions, in which composers, some of whom are anonymous, adapted and modified the work of earlier composers. It begins with a skillful and creative adaptation by the Reverend Martin Madan, whose tune first bears the name Helmsley, and ends with one of the great hymn tunes, the arrangement by Vaughan Williams in 1907. But let's get ourselves tuned into the period by hearing the very first tune, called Oliver's, from the 1750s, as it appeared in Charles Wesley's tune book, which was discussed in part 1. As noted, the first big improvement to this pretty tune was by the Reverend Martin Madan. Popular in the 19th century, Martin Madan was an adapter of tunes and editor of texts. John Julian, author of the 1907 Dictionary of Hymnology, notes 170 texts adapted by him. US hymn books often call him Dr. Madan as a sign of esteem. His tunes appear especially in US hymn books. He was born in Peterborough, in southern England, into privilege, as they say. His father was an equerry, so high gentry with royal connections. Young Martin, like John Kennick, and like so many young men, lived a dissolute life, but was saved, brought to Christ, and joined the Anglican Church after hearing John Wesley preach, eventually becoming a priest and the chaplain of Lock Hospital in London. Hymnary has 17 hymn tunes credited to him as composer. At least one of them, Helmsley, was an adaptation, so perhaps others were as well. His adaptation is the first to bear the name Helmsley, although it's not recorded where the name comes from. Helmsley is a town in North Yorkshire, a long way from London or Peterborough. Before looking at the tune, I want to discuss a musical feature generally referred to as dotted quavers. Dr. Madan's excellent tune makes use of this short rhythmic pattern. Dotted quavers look like this. A pair is made up of a dotted quaver followed by a semiquaver. In music notation, a quaver is twice the length of a semiquaver, and a dotted note has its length increased by a half, so 1.5 times its regular length. A semiquaver can be known as a 16th note. In normal singing at a moderate tempo, about 16th note is about as fast as a singer might normally sing. Hence, as written, the dotted quaver part of the pair of notes is held for 3/16th notes and the semiquaver for 1, which gives it a skipping feeling. Oliver's and the various versions of Helmsley use this feature a lot. It's a common rhythm, and since so many features in music have a special name, I wondered what the old music theories in the past used to call this. But astonishingly, this pattern doesn't have a special name. A dotted quaver followed by a semiquaver is just called dotted quavers. I was very surprised. I was expecting a beautiful evocative name in French or Italian, but no. Now, the way dotted quavers are played differs from the strict interpretation of the notation. So the idea is the dotted note is 3/16, is 3 times 1/16. The semiquaver is 1/16. With longer notes such as minims or crotchets, dotted notes are played fairly strictly as notated. A dotted note gets 1.5 duration. But with quavers, the dotted note is not usually played to its full value. It's up to the performer or the conductor, but it would usually be played with just a sort of skipping feeling that can be somewhat shorter than notated. The variation can be quite considerable. In jazz, this effect is called swing. It's a human rhythm that can't really be captured in notation. Music is not machine language. Notation is just a guide, and humans should always feel free to interpret the subtle aspects of rhythms for themselves. In fact, this feature wouldn't work most of the time if the notation were followed too exactly. Music ceases to be truly musical when the natural rhythms of the human body and the human soul are overridden by mathematical rigidity. Anyway, these skipping notes, or dotted quavers, give Oliver's, and especially the early versions of Helmsley, much of its flavour, but they also make it feel a little light, and perhaps not quite as serious as the text. And as we'll see, little by little, later composers and arrangers began to feel the need, very carefully, to straighten them out, or at least some of them. Here's Dr. Madan's Helmsley. The original tune, Oliver's, has quite a free melody, very typical of the wonderful Baroque in music, and has been described as being in the style of 18th century theatre music. Dr. Madan's Helmsley really is an improvement over Oliver's. He does what any good classical composer would do. He preserves most of the elements of the melody, but makes it a little more regular and gives it form. And in places, like a good hymn tune composer, he also alters the melody to make it more singable. He regularizes the melody, but keeps its free spirit, especially by the skillful use of these dotted quavers. In his harmonization of the tune, one significant change he makes is adding continuous, or actually repeating, bass notes spanning several bars in different places. This gives the piece gravitas without needing to sacrifice the lively rhythms of the melody. A sustained, or in this case repeating, bass note like this can be called a pedal point, or sometimes just called a pedal, where point means something like device or technique. And the theory is that the word pedal originally came from the organ pedal, so holding a sustained note with melody and harmony changing over the top of it. This can be called a pedal point. One thing I should also point out, the melody is in the tenor line. This may be because this version is from a US hymn book, and that was something that was often done in the USA in this time. I've moved the melody to the top voice because playing it in the tenor on the guitar, so playing it in the middle, would result in the melody being buried. And when you do move the melody to the top, you end up with the harmony often being in tenths and sixths. A tenth is the harmony of a third played an octave higher. Harmonizing a melody with tenths and sixths is a very classical thing, which in my mind I associate with Mozart. These also feature in the later versions, so I suspect that other composers and arrangers also did the same thing and moved the melody line from the tenor voice to the top voice. I like Dr. Madan's Helmsley a lot. It has an uplifting rhythm. The melody of all these versions is joyous, but this is the most joyous, and it's very refined. He also uses only one brief minor chord, and the rest of his chord palette is simple and almost all major chords, albeit with a certain amount of tension as the harmonized melody interacts with the long slow notes in the bass. So this, the pedal point, the major tonality, the cheerful melody, and the subtle tension all contribute to make it a glorious celebration of Christ's future return. Let's look now at a completely different tune. In 1861, Hymns Ancient and Modern, in its groundbreaking first edition, included Lo, He Comes with Clouds Descending. The text is pure Wesley, but the team at Hymns Ancient and Modern were seemingly not quite ready for the melodic and stylistic flights of the tune Helmsley. So instead, they used the tune St. Thomas by John Francis Wade. As noted, I think much of the change in the music for this text was driven by a desire to have a tune that suited the serious subject of the text. St. Thomas isn't a bad tune, but lacks the extra 2 bars in line 5 that make Helmsley such a perfect fit for John Kennick and Charles Wesley's texts. So St. Thomas is a nice tune, happy with a hint of sadness, somewhat wistful. It's a complicated artistic problem, actually. A song about the second advent must try to suggest the greatness and profundity of that event, but also needs to be emotionally profound. And profound human emotions are full of contradictions. When we feel deeply, joy is always mixed with hints of sadness and thoughtfulness. Divine themes, I think, are always outside our scope. We can cast our gaze towards them, but never really comprehend them, and our artistic efforts on such a great theme will always fall short. Such contradictions and limitations are part of the human condition, and part of good and great art. John Francis Wade is interesting, though. You may know him. He was the composer of the tune for my favourite popular Christmas carol, Adeste Fideles, the tune for O Come All Ye Faithful. And apparently, in musicological circles, John Francis Wade is and was famous for being one of the first to reintroduce plain chant tunes to hymnary. Plain chant was something dear to the hearts of the hymn's ancient and modern team, and its rediscovery was a big event in hymn circles in Britain during the 19th century. Perhaps that influenced their decision to use this tune. Or perhaps, as scholars of music history, they couldn't get over Helmsley's origins, or at least its stylistic connections with theatre music, which was considered rather improper. The theatre was where those with dissolute lives, such as John Kennick when he was a young man, would have spent a lot of time. Also, one thing I love about this version is the typesetting. The minims with their tails down are set backwards. It's completely non-standard and makes the music more difficult to read, but as a piece of visual design, it looks very artistic. Now let's look at 3 versions of the tune Helmsley. 2 that I think of as Victorian, although they're really probably 19th century American, and the classic final version by Vaughan Williams. Final because it's the arrangement most commonly found in hymn books today, and there hasn't been another reworking of the tune since. We'll start with the version published by Ira Sankey, then the one published by Walter Bond Gilbert, and then compare passages of all 3, finishing with the full Vaughan Williams arrangement. This version comes from Sacred Songs and Solos, a hymn book compiled by Ira Sankey for use in his tour of Britain with Dwight Moody in 1873-74. Ira Sankey was a hymn performer, revivalist, composer, and arranger. He was very popular in his time. The tour of Britain reportedly got off to an unimpressive start, but soon became a huge success. However, some of the hymns were unfamiliar to British audiences, hence the need for a hymn book. This version is described as hymns as sung by Ira Sankey, and I've called this version the Sankey version, but it is also credited to the Reverend Madan. However, it has a lot of very Victorian chord changes. This style of harmony is a very strong, late form of the melodic tension harmony we talked about in episode 6. They are classic diatonic cadences that propel a melody along. Just to be confusing, I've transposed this from B flat down to G. The original was in B flat. It's a nice key, but very high. The Gilbert version has removed Dr. Madan's pedal point and uses very diatonic harmonies. Lots of 1s, 5s and 4s. But it has a couple of different features. It's scored for 4/4 with the melody mainly in crotchets, so it has twice as many bars as Dr. Madan and Vaughan Williams. It has a lovely moving bass line in bars 5 and 6, and later bars 13 and 14 because of the repeat. This little passage has a lovely floating feeling and is followed by a little chromatic sequence, C, C sharp and D in the bass. It has some of Dr. Madan's 10ths and 6ths, but with strong diatonic changes, even in this passage. Diatonic, dia meaning two, so diatonic refers to the major minor key system and the harmonies that have developed around this. And a lot of use of 1/5 and 5/1 changes is a feature of diatonic harmony. There are similarities between these two Victorian versions. Perhaps there's a preceding version that I haven't come across. That wouldn't be unusual. Vaughan Williams scored his arrangement in 4/2 in crotchets. Crotchets are quarter notes, so the same number of bars as Dr. Madan, who scored in 4/4 and quavers, which are eighth notes, but half the number of bars as the Gilbert and Sankey versions. Like the others, he uses the melody of the Madan version, but with slightly fewer dotted notes. Let's make a few little comparisons. For the first line of text, 8 bars or 4 bars, depending on the version, comparing Dr. Madan's version to the Sankey version, the pedal is now a descending bass, and it's very diatonic. Lots of 1 and 5 chords. Then, comparing the Sankey version to the Vaughan Williams version, they're basically similar, but the Vaughan Williams version is less predictable and a little bit smoother. He takes the descending bass and the chords over it from the Sankey version, but he deviates a little from the classic diatonic chords and makes it a touch harmonically richer. Further down the piece, if we compare Madan to Gilbert, in his bars 5 and 6, Gilbert adds a counter melody in the tenor and bass voices, to Madan's strong single chords. I love Gilbert's counter melody here. It's really grown on me. And in the same passage, Vaughan Williams uses a counter melody too, but a much stronger, more purposeful one, less floating, and it emphasises Dr. Madan's chords, descending and then emphasising the G over B and the D over A, which is a big, rich change. And in the second half of this, where Gilbert has a little chromatic sequence, Sankey uses straight 1 and 5 changes, Vaughan Williams includes a nice little bit of voice work. He has these 2 rather spacey C chords. C6 moving to C major 7, which is a lovely touch. For lines 3 and 4 of the text, as always, there's a repeat. And in the 5th line of the text, all the versions are slightly straighter than Dr. Madan. Having heard Dr. Madan's very nice rhythms, I sometimes want to put them back in. I think actually they did slip in a couple of times when I was playing the other versions. In this passage, line 5 of the text, overall, Vaughan Williams incorporates a lot more subtle little complexities. There's a D suspended here. A slightly dissonant F sharp diminished here over B. That's a hard chord to play actually. Like most harmony, it's quite subliminal. This lovely sequence here, with the G and A minor, with the inner voices sustained, comes straight from the Sankey version, but Vaughan Williams follows it with a sudden little sequence of strong changes. B minor, A minor, E minor, D. These are interesting changes actually. They're non-standard, but they're very strong. They lead strongly into the final line of text. All these fleeting changes and dissonances in the Vaughan Williams version make the melody really ring and soar. All 3 versions finish fairly similarly, although again, in terms of the melody, I do prefer Dr. Madan's lovely little triplets that the others have all removed. So Ralph Vaughan Williams' version, in fact, has a lot of similarities to the Ira Sankey version. It reminds me a little, in this respect, of the way great painters used to work. Rembrandt might get his assistants to fill in the background of a painting and paint the clothes, and then come in and with a few little brush strokes, he would capture the character of an individual in a painting. Ralph Vaughan Williams, one of the great 20th century composers, has done something similar. He's used many elements of earlier arrangements and then come in with a few small changes, really masterful changes, and lifted it to make it a truly magnificent hymn tune. 100 years later, Ralph Vaughan Williams' version remains the most published tune. It no longer feels like a tune that isn't quite right. It's a masterful piece of adaptation, taking most of what had been written before, adding just a couple of artistic touches. It's one of the most perfect tunes in hymnary, actually, and suits the text extremely well. But we shouldn't forget what came before it. Dr. Madan's first adaptation in particular deserves to be remembered.
Lo, he comes with clouds descending, once for our salvation slain, thousand saints attending, swell the triumph of his train. Christ the Lord returns to reign.
I hope you enjoyed this story of multiple attributions, a hymn contributed to by multiple minds over multiple generations, an artistic conversation, and an active creation by an entire spiritual community. I don't think our age could produce such a work of music and poetry, contributed to and refined by multiple writers and composers over many generations, some known, some anonymous. There would be disapproval. Please feel free to comment. My conclusions are hardly definitive, and the book of Proverbs says that those who would be wise must love correction. As always, please forgive my limitations, which are many, and whether in our own words, the words of others, or a mixture of the two, let's all sing and give praise to God.